Hi, I'm Tom from TC Tiny and welcome to my bushfire resistant tiny houses. This is bushfire resistant tiny house number 3. It's an extremely resistant house to fire. It's based on the flame zone regulations here in Australia, which is the highest level that we have. And today I'm going to talk about timber and why timber is a fire resistant material. I've used timber on the inside of these shutters and also on the fascias on the outside. I've got timber frame, timber ply. It's radiata pine generally here in Australia that we're using, silvertop ash on the doors. This is my ironbark fascia, burnt black in the style of Shushugiban. An enormous amount of other techniques that I've used to make these houses fire resistant, including cramming insulation into just about everything, and protecting the softer pine from the exterior heat. Magnesium board also is a cladding that I've used for that purpose. Here we can see pine underneath the floor area there. To test pine and to prove my point that wood is a fire resistant material, I've built myself a wall, and it's out of radiata pine. We wouldn't use radiata pine here in Australia on the exterior because it rots too quickly. But just to prove a point, standard pine, a lot of holes in it, nail holes. There's a few gaps you can see just on the edge there. It's not a particularly well built wall. And on the back, wax blob, so we can test the temperature that the wall gets to. Wax will melt at about 60 degrees, which is pretty important. That's about how the temperature that a human could withstand inside the house as well. So the fire I'm using is a LPG flame that's about 1900 degrees. My burner is set to 120 psi. It's a massive flame. It's extremely hot. It's way hotter than you could get inside a bushfire. Generally, the flames of a bushfire will hit around the 800 degrees to 1000 degrees. I can't replicate the amount of radiant heat that a bushfire produces, which is why I've gone over the top with the flame instead. So what we're looking for is a material that stays stable under heat, which doesn't ignite and spread the flame, and a material which insulates the interior of the house from the outside heat. And timber is doing all of that. This radiata pine has no rated resistance to fire. It's well below the density of the rated materials, and yet we can see here that it is not igniting the way that the regulations would suggest it does. You can also see in a minute that the backside of this board is still cool. So that's a 6-minute burn there. I'll put it in fast forward for you guys. Wax blob still intact. Wall number 2 is red ironbark. Secondhand ironbark. I filled a few decking screw holes there. It's got a very thin coating of decking oil on it. It's 19mm by 140mm decking. Built in exactly the same style. To demonstrate how dense this timber is, you can't see it on your camera, but so I'm going to do this experiment. That's cedar being dropped into water, Baltic pine, radiata pine, and a bit of pine ply, a bit denser when it's ply. I've got a surprisingly dense piece of Tasmanian blackwood and messmate. Of course, these timbers do vary from piece to piece. Generally, I'm working with the heartwood, not sapwood. And here I have mountain ash, which doesn't have a rating to fire. Queensland cypress, which does have quite a high rating to fire. Silvertop ash, which is a very stable timber. I've used this on the doors. That's a piece of merbau and blackbutt, jarrah, grey gum, and lastly the ironbark. So an extremely dense timber, will never float. And here we are testing it with my LPG gas torch. So you can see instantly there's a difference between this and the pine. The way that the yellow flame comes off it is a lot less ignition there. It's It's a much calmer burn. And in between my 30-second intervals, you can see that the flame dissipates much more quickly. So it is an extremely heavy timber which is very fire resistant. I can't say for certain that you need that level of flame resistance. Most of the Australian timbers, most of the Australian houses are not rated for flame contact. They're rated for ember and radiant heat. Not expect to have a large amount of flame contact. Flame contact in bushfires is usually measured in seconds, not in minutes. This is a 6-minute burn. And you can see again with this experiment that the backside stays cool and I'm able to lift it off with my hands. So this timber here, this material has done everything that we would want for a bushfire resistant house. My overall point that I want to make here is that the cladding, regardless of what timber it's made out of, is already the strongest part of the house. It is in fact the weak points that we need to up in their resistance to fire. There it is, my wax blob still intact. This is another experiment. You can find this on my YouTube channel. Here I was trying to experiment with the insulation factors of the timbers and see how long I could keep my wax blob intact on the top there. This is pine, it's just regular pine ply, 9mm. It showed an extreme resilience and the insulative property. I was very impressed with it. I've also did an ironbark panel with and without fireproof paint as well, which is extremely effective. Of course, the problem here for a tiny house is the weight factor. Such an incredibly dense timber. They are required to be 19mm thick to meet housing regulations. Can't see for certain why this material here needs to be 19mm thick, which is actually 38 times thicker than a piece of steel needs to be. Glass as well, you can find that test on my channel. I was quite impressed with the glass panels. They're rated to around 800 degrees, so they really had no chance of surviving my 1900 degree gas torch. But windows are a huge weak point for fire, and it's those weak points which you really need to be looking at, not the cladding. Cladding is the first thing that people think of. It's actually the last part which needs to be improved for fire resistance. So this is some of my timbers in their construction form. This is one tiny house that I built which was fire resistant to a medium level, and this one here was my first. Hope that's been a useful video. Please check out my other videos on YouTube, Facebook, TC Tiny. We've got a website and Instagram as well. And if you have questions, leave a comment below. I'll get back to them as soon as I can. Thank you. I've been Tom from TC Tiny.